I've been working particularly with MITRE on what are the sources of system resilience and how does that, how can new technologies make that better and how can new technologies avoid making it worse? So that's where I'm coming from. So currently I have what's called a MIP grant from MITRE that's funding half of my time and a PhD student. And so a lot of this work is from there, but also previously had some funding that I'm pulling from. So the questions I want to answer today is to dive into this really cool technology called voice loops. And what are all the things we can learn from that really interesting system, just fascinating system, for all these various technologies that we want to make now that we have major advances in what we can do with machine learning and that type of thing. And then also, how can we avoid making problems happen when we do put these things in? So I don't know, since I don't have access to the chat, I was hoping to ask just, who has worked with a human factors person before? I know you have Jason Sleem and some other people in your department or maybe other people. So if you're willing to type it into the chat and then it can be shared with me, what your level of understanding already is of what human factors is. I don't know if anyone is typing anything in.
Jacob is typing something. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to hear what his comments are.
And this is Jason. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Sorry, some of us were a bit late because we had a meeting run a little late, and so we're just hopping on now. And while Jacob is typing that, I'll just answer that question as well, in that we're a very small department, and so there's actually been a lot of collaboration. I've had almost every single faculty member here over the years reach out to me and incorporate me in some of their work in one way or another. And so I would say over the last 7 years since I've been here, the understanding of human factors has grown considerably. So it's the nature of our department, I would say.
Well, good. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying hi. Thank you for letting me know that you guys popped in a little late, which is fine. I'll just try and keep that in mind as I keep going. So I'll just repeat that I'm hoping to learn as much from people who are here today as to, share my great wisdom or whatever. So that's really neat, Jason, that you have such a supportive environment and colleagues in your department. I'm jealous because I'm in the College of Medicine and they're incredibly supportive, but they don't have the engineering background. Like I don't work with a single engineer. I work with, clinical people. And then could you share Jacob's comments as well?
Yeah, Jacob's comments is Dr. Sleem is my advisor, so I'd say it's relatively high. So
relatively high. Well, I must be seeing him right after this then. So that's great.
I also want to express my expertise. So my PhD committees, they are all focused on human factors and also human-computer interactions. So I did have some paper focusing on applying the artificial intelligence methods like machine learnings to facilitate the quantitative analysis of humans' visual attention and cognitions by using wearable sensors. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, that helps me think at what level to talk and how to talk. So basically, my definition of human factors is it's not really a science. It kind of steals from other people's sciences. And automation, machine learning types of applications in aviation, nuclear power. Now we're looking at hospitals and IV pumps and things from the electronic health record. That's kind of, the space that I think human factors falls into. I can't play this voice loop, but apparently you're sending out the slide so you can play it. So I'll show you up here in the left-hand corner. If you play, you can hear what a voice loop is. It's apparently not playing over the system. So I'll try and describe it. It's like multiple CB channels at the same time. So you have people who have a boss and two-ish people working on a CB channel that's continuously running. And so you have a headset and you're talking. But what's cool about the voice loops is really not the direct talking. So yes, you can, have a CB channel that you're talking to your team with. But what's neat about it is the ability to listen in. And so I want to talk a little bit about how this allows the loops to basically be an alarm for other people, a kind of a smart alarm. So let me give some flesh to that. So people who are on loops in NASA Johnson Space Shuttle Mission Control were remote. And so you have a front room, which has the people responsible for the mechanical systems, the people responsible for the electrical systems, someone who talks to the astronauts, but they had support people who were literally, a building away, who were remote and were real-time supporting those people and telling them what to do. So in the mechanical engineering system, Max is the front room position that I was observing as a grad student, and Mech was the backup position for that mechanical engineer responsible for taking care of the mechanical engineering systems on the shuttle. And so in the loop I would have played for you, you hear the more junior person say to the more senior person, reservoir quantity in system 3 has steadily been decreasing. And then you hear the boss say, copy that. And then you hear the more junior person say, we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. So it's all so calm. So one of the things I was going to point out with the loops is you just hear, we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. And it's just really like almost nothing, like just no emotion. But what happened is, because that leak in the third auxiliary power unit happened during the ascent phase, they considered immediately aborting the entire mission. They considered coming home early. They considered emergency procedures. They thought about not doing the docking with the Mir space station because they were worried about oil getting onto the Mir space station, which is the Russian station at the time. They worried about coming home in bad weather, so they actually extended their trip by a day. So there's just that little, we're going to have to keep a close eye on that, has all these implications for like 7 days. And so if you contrast this with an alarm that pushes out to everybody, beep, 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 leak in auxiliary power unit 3, instead what this is somebody just quietly says to their teammate something, and then everybody else knows it's happening without having any push at all. So let me explain that a little bit more. So there's something called a flight director loop and an air to ground loop. And so nobody really is listening to the mechanical systems engineering loop except maybe the electrical guys. They're just doing their work. But when something big happens, then they would tell the big boss, the flight director, who's in charge of the entire mission. And that flight director is the person who makes all the decisions about everything, really, sort of the command and control leader. And so anything said to that person, everybody wants to hear. And so it's continuously monitored. And so what you hear is somebody saying something to the flight director, everybody hears it. And so it's like an alarm. And it's short, quiet, short, small communications on what are the statuses of all of the various things that the space shuttle needs to have happen. In addition, everybody, including people at home on NASA TV at the time, are monitoring what the astronaut on the ground says to the astronauts in the shuttle. And so that's called the air to ground loop. And so you hear a lot of things said on there. And that sort of tells you where you are in the mission. Okay, we're now, the booster's going to come off, or we're going to press to where we're going to stabilize the ship. And so by listening in on these high visibility loops, you can, we immediately had almost the entire mechanical engineering staff got in their cars and drove to the control center to help them out, because they could tell that there was something big going on with this auxiliary power unit. And so you can see what these emerging issues are when they say things like negative return, that means we're not going to come back. So now they all know they're not going to come back. You can see when to tell the flight director things, because you can hear what everyone else is telling the flight director. And anything you tell the flight director is essentially like telling everyone. So when the Max position got around to saying, hey, flight director, we have a little leak, everybody and their brother immediately starts monitoring the internal mechanical systems loop, because they all want the earliest information possible on what's going on with this system. So how does this play out? So on the loop that's your team loop, where you're doing your work, there's all this technical detail. Is it 0.3% per minute? Is it 0.6? When I take out the heat calculations, I get 0.4. And so they're doing all this rapid but sophisticated engineering to get to where they say, what is the actual amount of a leak we have in our auxiliary power unit? Have we lost capability in one of the things that's going to get us home safely? On the flight director loop, that's not on there. They simply say, we have a leak, it's less than 1% per minute. So whether or not it's 0.5 or 0.6 doesn't matter to the flight director, because what matters to the flight director is in our standard operating procedures, if it's less than a minute, we don't come home. If it's more than 1% a minute, we're going to come home. And so it's like it switches from, hey, we have a leak, to, because we have a leak, we're informing you, but there's nothing you have to do right now. And so the loops themselves are like interesting smart alarms, because it switches from just telling you a threshold has been crossed kind of thing. And actually there hasn't even really been crossed because it's less than 1, to saying what to do about it. And so you have a different kind of framing for the supervisor and everybody who's listening to the supervisor. It is less detail and it's more oriented towards what are you going to do about it? How does it relate to our procedures? And then it gets even more complicated. So one of the fascinating things about these loops is it takes about 3 or 4 weeks of training to even be able to listen to them, because you have your loop that is your job talking to your boss about your technical work, and almost all of your work is conducted on it. Then you have this flight director loop that you're supposed to listen to that covers all of the elements of the shuttle, the water systems, the electrical, all that. Then you have, the people whose lives depend on those systems, so the astronauts. So you have what the astronauts are being told about what's going on. And then you have 5 other loops that you're monitoring. So that's where people are like, how can you possibly monitor 8 loops at a time? So basically, pretty much everybody in mission control is monitoring 8 loops at a time. One of the tricks is that many of these loops are actually completely quiet the vast majority of the time. So for example, there are things called conference loops that are set up in advance prior to the mission. And you might have the electrical systems and the mechanical systems work together frequently. And so you have an ECOM max flight loop that is never used until it needs to be. And so it's always dormant, it's always quiet, but it's also always on. And so after this leak happened, ECOM is the electrical systems, they reached out to the mechanical systems and were like, could we talk about this? The way they do that is not by calling like the personal cell phone of somebody, or not by calling somebody's individual line. They do it on a conference loop that's set up specifically for that purpose in advance. And so their protocol is to say the name of the person they're calling and then themselves to identify themselves. So they'll say Max ECOM, meaning I am ECOM, I'm asking to talk to Max. And they don't have to mess up the working loop in order to have that communication. And then the Max will say, go ahead, or else they'll say, hang on a second. One of the neat things about that is that the electrical people can hear how busy the mechanical engineering people are while they're working to know when to make that request to talk. So because they are monitoring the mechanical engineering loop, they know when there's a space and they can say, hey, can we talk about this? So that's one of the monitored loops. And then the other thing that will happen is you don't know if there will be a problem in the mechanical, the water, the booster, the electrical. So you monitor all of them at very low levels. You have your team at a high level of volume. And then when you're like, oh, nothing's going on with those guys, you just drop them off. So after ascent, you might just stop listening to booster. You stop listening to the water systems because nothing happened with them. And so there's sort of an early monitoring to figure out who to monitor. All right. So how does this matter? Like what about this can matter for designing all of these cool new technologies? Here's what I think. So I'm sure there are other ones, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. But one is this idea of listening in. So yes, you have your direct team channel. And so what is a channel in an electronic health record? In an electronic health record, your channel might be the progress notes that you write. So you might say, well, I'm a physician. I need to see other physicians' progress notes, which document what's happening with the patient. But you also might want to see the social worker's progress notes or the physical therapist's progress notes. So this listening in idea doesn't have to be audio. The idea is that coordination is aided by getting information that you're not directly working on. And so one of the ways we've seen this play out is in emergency responses to hurricanes. The people who deal with the government and requesting emergency money from the government want to listen in on what the fire 911 call center type people are doing immediately in response to the emergency, because they want to see, do we have to ask for emergency funds? And so there are different groups that are not in the action who benefit by listening in to what other people are doing. And so literally in this case, it's listening in, literally listening to what people are saying. But that listen in idea can play out with view only, with haptic devices that are buzzing. So it's being able to see what others are doing and sort of see the bubbling up of things that might impact you. But it's not as easy as just giving people view only access to things. So it's not like you just want to give social workers view only access to what physicians have written about the progress notes. You want to be able to dial up and down the levels of detail and also switch the detail from the specifics of the sensor values to how that impacts plans. So you could imagine having a progress note for a physician where you can zoom up and see just the bottom line from an assessment, or you can see something that says, because of what I'm seeing, I'm going to request a consult from a cardiac specialist. So how can we have this listening in idea shorter so that it doesn't take as much cognitive effort to get there? And then another sort of interesting thing about this whole situation is you have time horizons. So they say, less than 1% until we turn off the engines, what they call MECO, main engine cutoff. And then you have, after we're stabilized, then we start worrying about returning back home. And so there are things we have to decide before we turn off the engines. And then there are things we have to decide the day before we come home, because we're going to decide where to come home and how to come home and how we're going to change that. We have to decide what to do before we dock with the Mir space station. And so you have these alarm type things that people are learning about. There's a leak in this unit, in this APU. But then you have to say, what are all those implications for the next 5 minutes, for the next 4 days, for the next 7 days? And what you see in the handovers and the shift changes is them doing that. So they'll give an event, there was a leak, and then they'll say the implications are, we might not dock with Mir space station, we're checking that out. We might want to do some safing activities. We might want to turn on the engine and turn it off again so that our people who are doing maintenance can see what the problem was. We might want to come home a day early because, just the longer you're in space, the more scary that is, and we can accomplish most of our mission objectives with 1 day early. And we might want to dock or land in California instead of in Florida because the weather tends to be better, which has some cost implications, and you have to take the shuttle, farther on the ground, but maybe it's safer. So you can think about having some kind of informatics type support where you can link these possible outcomes of events with them in some kind of display. imagine some kind of implications display. And then you can have monitoring and transmitting information without interrupting others. This is the thing that most of the healthcare people that I talk to get super excited about, because they'll talk about like being in the middle of a surgery and getting interrupted by some call about, change the billing code on a patient you saw yesterday. And so there's so much etiquette around when can you interrupt somebody? Are they busy right now? That people in healthcare at least would love to see and it's not as simple as busy or not busy or call me or don't call me or I'm not available or available. It's much more subtle than that. It's exactly when to fit in your question, whether or not your question relates to what they're already discussing, or you're going to change topics on them, how quickly to get your question across, whether or not to set up a time to meet or to ask the question right then. There are all these things that you can get just by listening into the detailed work and seeing where their heads are at. And then, obviously you can just have coordination technologies. So what can we do with Slack or with WhatsApp or email or so what can we do in terms of supporting coordination in a field? And so we can kind of know what other people are doing at this kind of low level by sort of monitoring. Landmark events are definitely important, and that air-to-ground loop was really the place where most of that happened. So nearly everything on the air-to-ground loop was like, okay, we've hit this landmark ATO, we've hit this landmark MECO, we've hit this landmark, we've gotten done with ASCENT. And so broadcasting those landmark events, you probably can predict in advance for most things what landmarks will be and have some kind of broadcast where you can also have some other details on something that people can monitor kind of peripherally, mainly to make sure that they happen. When did they happen? Did they happen as expected? In kind of like an almost mindless way without having it take up the main sort of cognitive work line. And then really what's notable about all this is the people talking almost have no extra work. Yes, the mechanical engineers were aware that pretty much everybody and their brother was listening to them the second this thing happened, but they didn't actually have to do anything to support that. They didn't have to send out updates to people. They didn't have to let people know anything. Everyone could just listen in on it. And then as we think about smart alarms, we can think about how bad alarms are now. So people talk about alarm fatigue, the alarm problem, alarm overload. There's all these various definitions of them, but fundamentally, at least in healthcare, the reliability is crap. And so you have a huge number of false alarms, a huge number of alarms. And so what's really noteworthy about this is probably in the entire ASCENT phase of just 30 minutes, this APU having a leak was probably the only thing that would fit an alarm kind of situation. And so you sort of have, 100% reliability and one in 30 minutes that you want to hear about. And then I won't read these to you, but basically a lot of these same ideas can be applied to alarms. So if an alarm is already sounding, do you really want to sound a second alarm simultaneously? Or could you sequence them so that you can have 5 alarms in a row instead of 5 all going off at the same time? You can begin to think about, people will talk about moving thresholds earlier in alarms so you can have an earlier detection of when things are going off. Yes, you can do that, but there's probably some better ways that we can support early detection of failures and emerging issues than simply changing the threshold setting. And then putting the action with the alarm is kind of an obvious one. And then being able to justify your interpretation on demand happened all the time on the flight director loop. So, Max would say it's less than 1%, and the flight director would say, well, we're getting 0.8. Is that what you're getting? And so you actually have people pushing back on you after the alarm. Well, as far as I'm aware, there's not much of a pushback on feature with these alarms. It says your respiratory rate is 89, but you don't get to really say, well, is that pulse ox really well on the finger or not? And so this ability to kind of, it's more than explainability, it's more than why did it go off? It's also, I don't know if I believe you. Give me some more information about whether or not this could be an artifact. So after this next one, I'm just going to pause, and if this is all we cover and we talk from here, that's fine, because I want to switch on to a different case study after this. The other thing that I think is just a real opportunity is auditory space design and shared display design. So these are areas that could benefit actually from machine learning. So if we think about auditory spaces, so if you have people in any setting talking to each other, and you have the ability to use Dragon to get a transcript of anybody talking to each other, that technology has really advanced. And so one of the things that we've played with is if you are an attending physician who has 4 teams of resident physicians under you who are all handing off patients in the intensive care unit, what you can do is have the Dragon transcripts happening and have some kind of machine learning or display of the kinds of things that people are saying to each other. And if people start saying, well, I'm not sure that's right, or what's your reason for that, or I disagree, or these keywords, whatever we use machine learning to use, you can direct the attention of the supervisor to real time sort of interject on what's happening between those residents. You can have a similar thing with pharmacists. So you have one pharmacist with 4 teams rounding on patients. Which team should that pharmacist, zoom in with FaceTime or with Zoom to support to improve the medication ordering or the make sure the kidney levels are right? So if kidney levels are important for pharmacists to help with, how can you have transcripts that are, or machine learning that's saying anything that has to do with liver during a round in the hospital, not just alert, but provide an auditory space or a shared space where it can be clear to the pharmacist all the things that are being said about that and whether or not it makes sense to kind of zoom in and give your 2 cents. Similarly, how can we have phone calls structured around landmark events? So there's already advances with just data collection with pens where you can push something on a smart piece of paper that says, if I'm going back to a recording, start here. You can be more structured about that. What are the things that we're supporting? So if we're supporting, a conference where someone's giving a presentation, there's an introduction slide, a method slide, a finding slide, a discussion slide. How can we have those landmark events be structured so that you can have fast playback or auditory spaces, or you're listening to 2 talks at once, which ones you want to go to. So we can start thinking about things along those lines. And then synchronizing, meeting up together. I don't know about you, but we started having these personal Zoom meetings happening during remote conferences so that we could sort of chat about, which one we had a reaction to it, or it might spark an idea, or maybe we want to critique it real time. So we want to have this sort of personal Zoom meeting going on while the conference is going on. And then being able to Zoom is a big idea. And of course, not incorporating things into the legal or formal record is just a thing that we want to push every time we can, because if you don't stop it, people will jump there, and then you're going to lose the ability to have this nice informal communication. So I think I'm just going to pause there. And like I said, I don't care if this is all we talk about, but wanted to just sort of pause there and get any thoughts or reactions or anything.
Yeah.
Emily? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Emily, this is Jason. Your research at NASA on the voice loops is really fascinating. It reminds me of I think a study that Emily Roth did on railway workers, and you had the dispatchers and the roadway workers and the train crews, and it was fascinating because they had something similar to the voice loops you're describing, where they had these kind of listening in strategies that enabled the the railroad workers to recognize situations where the information in their possession was relevant to the safety of others. And so, for example, the dispatchers would monitor communications directed at others to maintain their situation awareness of the location and activities of the trains and the roadway workers, and so many other examples I remember from that study. And it was interesting because this was all kind of, it wasn't intentionally designed. And so when they went to implement a digital version of the communication systems, they didn't realize that by eliminating this kind of party line listening in aspect of it, that they were actually threatening the situation awareness and safety of the workers. And so I just thought that was a very similar example. But I think what's different maybe is that the NASA voice loops were kind of intentionally designed in, but in that railroad example, that safety and resilience, that informal listening in strategy seemed to develop organically and informally. Wonder if that's the case, and you can comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Emily Ross' research on that was actually inspired somewhat by the voice loops, somewhat. And so we talked a little bit about it. One of the things about NASA is that you have people on a shuttle, right? So you have people in space. So they can't share displays because there's too much of a lag. So they have to have audio communications. And similarly with the design of the space shuttle mission control as it was at the time, you only had a front room that could fit 32 people. And so the 200 people who were needed to support the mission couldn't all be in that room. So what sort of happened is, because you had forced remote work and you had, at the time at least, not a great ability to have quick, shared visuals, that's how it sort of started. Whereas I think and it just sort of grew from there to go crazy, really, because they just had a lot of loops and they could just use them for other things as they thought of them. I think with the trains, it was more of this kind of people need to know what other people are doing stuff. And so there has been, like Ethan Luff in subways and other places, they've documented people just talking to themselves out loud. And it's not that they're schizophrenic or, and actually Paul Gorman documented this in healthcare, that people sort of talk out loud or talk louder to each other than they need to because other people overhearing it benefit. So two physicians talking about a patient to prepare for rounds, the nurse benefits by listening in. So that sort of overhearing thing is important. What I think that the voice loops adds to it is this idea that you can talk at multiple levels and to different audiences and use the synchronization things as well. Which I think some of that was in Emily Ross, but I think it was more like, I know something you need to know because of safety. And I agree completely that people missing this when they put new systems in is one of the things, that's the whole sources of system resilience. Being able to know what other people are doing is often lost when you design a system simpler, because it's easier for you as a software person to say, I'm going to design the physician system, and I'm going to design the nurse system, I'm going to design the pharmacist system, and I'm going to not worry about whether or not they need to know each other's work. It's easier for me to design it separate and not interacting. But thanks so much. It's great.
Thanks, Emily. That's cool. I'll let others speak.
Yeah, so Emily, I have another comment. Since I consider myself to be a data scientist that lies in the interdisciplinary area of human factors and data science. So I'm quite curious about the kind of human teaming in such a voice control or voice sharing area, because I can see a lot of potentials in integrating machine learning in such a scenario. At least from my perspective, I can think about three skills or three levels of such an integration. So first level is the kind of different tasks that we want to accomplish and different application scenarios that can lead to different type of conversations or different hierarchies in the voice transmission. And the second level is kind of individual. So for individual, we need to build individual models for different people so that we'll consider individual differences, which is really significant for human beings. And the third level is kind of a team level. So we may have one team, we have multiple teams, and within a team, we have different individuals with high individual differences, and how to jointly model such or preferences or even cognitive status for individuals, considering the individual difference and the similarity and differences among different teams. Those can be very interesting and can lead to very challenging topics in machine learning. Yeah.
Wow, that's really deep. First of all, amazing and brilliant. That just the one idea I have, which is just minor sparked by that, is we did see individuals who wanted to monitor more loops and individuals who wanted to monitor fewer loops. And I suspect that this is the same as people who sign up for listserv alerts versus people who want to, control their emails so they don't get 5 a day. I think with email is probably the best sort of personal differences. Like, are you somebody who wants all of that, like reply all, and you just want to be in on everything? Or are you somebody who only wants something sent to you if there's an action item and you want the action item in the title and you want like threads renamed and you want them to say, I'm sending this to you because. And so I actually think there could be some machine learning around that. So I suspect that some people might say, please don't reply all. Please remove me from this listserv. Could you please send me action items? Could you please highlight things in red that I have to do? Could you please send deadlines? I think that feedback is often given, at least in email applications, through email.
Yes.
For other people who are like, please make sure you always copy me. Please make sure that, please reply all so I can see everything. Let's not use box because I'd rather have email attachments. So if there's email attachments that are being routed around and everyone gets to see them, I think that's that personality style of wanting to see everything as it goes, rather than like everyone go into box and then we'll come back later with a document. I think we could potentially have at least 2 personality types learned from machine learning.
Yes, it's kind of individual differences we can quantify to understand human behaviors. Yeah,
or we could simply ask people, like, which one do you want? And then we could use machine learning to see whether or not what they're doing agrees with what they stated their preferences were.
We have even more people, like 100 or 1,000 people in a team, then maybe it takes so long to ask everyone, but we can cluster people into different groups that shares the similar or same preferences.
Right.
Or
Because if you're a supervisor, you might need to be copied on everything, even if you don't read it.
Yeah.
So then you could use machine learning to identify what doesn't need to be read. So like I've started creating folders where I group together, the things that I want to get but not read. Primarily because I want to influence the person who's sending it to keep me in the loop, but I don't necessarily want to read it. So it's like a folder of, I made them copy me, but I don't actually care unless something happens.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I think this is Faisal. Just wanted to chime in. So I think we need a smart email management system. I have this issue, so I keep putting emails on the top that are important, but I could not respond to them. I create folders, but I still lag behind. I have 50 emails in my email that need responses. So I don't know what's the optimal. I keep thinking about it all the time, searching for solutions or ideas or.
Yeah, and that's where I think machine learning on email is one of, and Slack, and so these sort of big overload situations, I feel like there's so much machine learning potential there. And at least in the healthcare space, we have physicians leaving being physicians because they have, in the primary care, they have so many emails where because they've missed them, a patient got harmed. So they get some kind of update on a critical lab value and they literally have no chance. And there's some kinds of emails that come in that are scanned PDFs of, something from a place that's not integrated with the electronic health system. So it doesn't get into the display. It doesn't get an alarm. It doesn't, and they just like literally, what I've heard is that there's just this grief or anxiety of what did I miss about my patient, where somebody died of cancer because I didn't get, even though the patient thought they sent it, it was from a place that's not in the infrastructure. And so Jason and I have actually talked about how do we address this email overload problem for physicians. But you're right, as just a professional, like we want to see these things get better. Like I actually have a folder just for my boss so that I never mistake or miss an email from her. But because it's a hidden folder, I sometimes miss them. So it's like the folder isn't good enough. I need like a folder plus something else. So I don't know if that at all responds to what you were sharing or. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good points. Yeah, I have the same. I have a folder for our department chair, actually, Pratik, and they have a subfolder of that. And actually, we had a case a couple of weeks ago. A student like email went to a spam folder. We missed his registration or her registration deadline, so that created an issue because the email went to the spam folder.
Oh yeah, the email to the spam folder that urgently has to be responded to problem. Yeah, I've got that one. Yeah, because email is a perfect example of something that has different time horizons. So people will send an email that says, I'm on my way, like something you need to know in 30 seconds versus, something that you need next year for your taxes. Like it has different time horizons. So we could actually think about somehow learning these time horizons with machine learning or setting it up that way, or that
we can develop an automated response for emails that are not important or emails that can be delayed like for a couple of days, and automated response just goes away and saying I will respond in a couple of days or something like that.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah, so how about we post our discussion here since there's a half of the seminar.
Sounds great.
Let's post later.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to skip my no, all good. I'm going to actually skip my next example because I want to get to this new project I'm doing with MITRE. So just ignore barcoding. We won't talk about it. But what happened with the national standard for summative usability testing for electronic health records that was identified to be acceptable for meaningful use incentives for Medicaid. So another way to put all that is the electronic health record companies cared a lot about this figure. So in order for electronic health records to be certified for use in the United States to take care of Medicaid and Medicare patients, they had to have a validation test, a safety test of their software that looked at what is the risk to patients, and risk was modified by how big these design flaws were that resulted in a patient getting a wrong medication or a wrong dose of a medication. And so we looked back at what in the interface caused that. And so, for example, if you have a pediatric dose of a medication that is small, there are electronic health records that will automatically change the number 0.2 milligrams to 20 because it thinks you made a mistake. So if it automatically changes the dose from 0.2 to 20, it actually is fatal to the child, to the baby in the neonatal intensive care unit. And so you can have the system essentially be responsible for killing a baby, sort of. And so what we did was we said, what are all the ways that we think patients can be harmed by the design of electronic health records? Let's test for these. And it's sort of a do no harm approach. Is there anything the system is doing that could cause problems for the physician, nurse, pharmacist, mainly physician writing medication orders, mainly medications hitting a patient when it shouldn't? And so that's what this model was. And so this model is from that NIST document that I was honored to write the national standard for. Since then, what I've been working on with Kelly Neville is the principal investigator of this project, is what do people do in systems that keep people safe? And how do new system implementations mess that up? So instead of we're introducing something that automatically makes changes to a medication order that ends up harming a patient, instead of that, you could think about you have automated support for a medication order for a physician. How does that system make it hard for people to make patients safe? So an example of that could be a physician orders a medication, 0.2 milligrams. The automated system changes it to 20. Instead of talking about how the automated system in the first place could be fixed to avoid that, what this project would do is say, how can a pharmacist or a nurse or a patient be given a display that makes it clear that this is an unusual change. So all of the medications to date have been 0.2, this one's 20, that's weird. Or typically for babies, we don't have doses this large, this is really atypical. Or here's the diagnosis of the patient, here's the weight of the patient, here's what it was ordered for the patient, isn't that strange? So it's sort of like after the action has been taken that could harm somebody, what are all the ways that our system is supporting this coordination and communication to catch and recover from these things? And the idea is that often with new technologies like Tesla, we lose these things. So rather than define all of these, let me talk through the Tesla example. So there is a Tesla auto steer feature. The Tesla auto steer feature says there's a car coming to the right and into my lane, and it looks like the car is going to hit me. I'm going to look as a car and see if there's an empty space in the lane to the left of me, and I will move the car into the lane to the left of me as long as it's clear. And so the idea is that there probably have been lives saved from this auto steer because a car's coming in, it doesn't see them, they move, all is well. And so you can say, well, you know, this automation is saving lives by taking the car and moving it into an empty lane. As long as it's empty, as long as we can believe it's empty, we're good. And one of the issues has been that ambulances and police cars sit in the half lane between the barrier on a highway and the left lane. And Tesla doesn't know enough to know that there's this half lane where these ambulances and people like that stand. And so there have been cases of where the auto steer has auto steered cars into like ambulance personnel and killed them because they're in that sort of half lane to the left. So you could say, okay, let's improve Tesla so that it recognizes people standing on the left or ambulance people. Or you could say, what is the sensitivity to a critical cue signifying a threat or boundary? So if we start saying that ambulances in this left side area are something that we need to protect, how do people already recognize that an ambulance is there? How do people already recognize that somebody is out of an ambulance? How can we take advantage of that and make that easier to do? So you could imagine having a GPS locator of where every ambulance is on every highway in the country and adding that in on a display. So it's not that you're modifying the automation to avoid the ambulance, but what you can do is you can show the driver there's an ambulance coming up in 2 miles by the way, this auto steer feature might try and go into them, so make sure you don't hit them. So it's not requiring manual control. It's not requiring that the person take over, but it's giving some sensitivity that there's a potential threat and that this automation is limited in this area. So it's a complex example, but hopefully you're getting the idea that it's a human plus automation plus visibility kind of solution to saying, even when the automation is dangerous, you can keep the system resilient if you think in this way. And so that's my major comment there. And so that's it. I want to open it up. There's 5 minutes left. I have references to all the stuff I've talked about, but I want to make sure that I get whatever feedback I can on this project, that we still have another 6 months or so to work out. And thank you for your interactions. So I'll end here.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for the nice presentation. And now it's time to ask questions to Emily, our speaker. And please, if you have questions, you can either type in chat or directly open your mic and say something.
Hi, Emily. This is Xiaomei. I have a question on the actually the first part. So you mentioned that for the alarms, it might be better to provide the recommendations also together with some interpretations for the situation. I'm thinking, for example, instead of just saying that the value of something is 0.3, you might say it's a little bit lower than the normal range. It gets very dangerous when it drops to 0.1. We need to take caution. So that might be a more complete information. I'm thinking for a lot of the visual information, we are slightly better than, for example, putting a question mark there in case people want to look at the interpretation for that. Why are people not doing that for like the vocal or voice or alarm?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, everyone's doing all kinds of innovative stuff. Everyone's sort of opening up the black box of explanation. There's lots of good work going on. But I feel like what the focus has been is, let me explain why I think something is a problem or why I think there's an issue. I don't think there has been enough focus on, let me show you the typical reasons why I'm wrong. So in the healthcare space with a respiratory alarm, the pulse ox comes off the finger. Or somebody takes a bath, and when they take a bath, it gets wet. Or when somebody scratches, it messes with the cardiac rhythms. Or when a baby cries, their respiratory rate goes up because they're crying, but they're actually fine. And so there are reasons for artifacts and alarms that you can be asked. People almost have like this checklist. You say an alarm goes off and you say, well, is that because of these 4 reasons, which means I can ignore you? And I'm not sure that the explanation space has really played that out. So if you say, a student is failing a class, here's an alarm, people will say, well, are they sick? Have they been missing school? Are they, are they just late on an assignment that needs to be coming in? Is there a grade that they're going to revise and resubmit? So there's sort of like these things that you ask next. And I don't know that alarms have been designed with that in mind yet. Kind of this sort of, that's what I mean by justification for interpretation. It's kind of like, yes, you could be right. And you can tell me your reasons why you think it's true. But I also want to know whether or not the reasons why it could be less important or wrong, have you looked into those or not? I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great question. All right, so I think we're at 1:59. Last thoughts, right?
And there are some chats I want to read to you for you. So our faculty member, Faisal, I just talked with him. He said, interesting work and thank you for the great presentation. And our PhD student, Mr. Sagar, he said, thank you for the great presentation. And I can see Alex is typing something. Alex, can you speak loud? So open your mic and directly ask a question.
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I was just going to ask a question about the examples that you gave of like the system changing the dosage versus like alerting that the dosage was weird and the ambulance detection. And I was just wondering kind of what the balance between the machine learning and the human decision making was there. And if, for example, like the human decision making would then help to train the machine learning, or if there was always going to be that requirement for the for the physician to like manually check that.
Yeah, I think the ambulance one is easier to answer. So having something in that extra half lane when it's officially not supposed to be there is something that you can learn from a couple accidents. So this idea that people hang out in this sort of half lane on the left that Tesla thinks is a full lane and doesn't recognize is filled. That's something that you can go then and work on in terms of, the visual detection recognition, the automation, if there's an ambulance there, maybe we turn off the Tesla for a second. So that's something that you don't need like machine learning techniques on. But because you just have a couple of things and it's big enough and you just make a change. But with the medication error type thing, one of the things that has been highlighted is that the actual amount of medication given from IV pumps depends on the tubing that's used. And you can have half of the dosage given, even though it's documented as full given. And so you could have machine learning on like how much medication is left in the IV pump after theoretically the 25 was gone. So you can unearth these things that you wouldn't find unless you were like carefully censoring and looking at data, if that makes sense. So this idea that what is ordered is different from what's administered is the kind of thing you could use machine learning to dig into.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're at time.
Yep.
This has been
Any
really.
other questions? Otherwise, we will stop here. And thank you, Emily. Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, Jason, want to say something?
I was just going to say thanks, Emily, and
Yeah, thank you.
gonna talk to you in just a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, let's thank you again for Emily, our great speaker today. And thank you, everyone, for attending this seminar.
Wonderful.
Well, I'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.